On the 29th of December, 1808, beside the Spanish town of Benavente, a British cavalry commander waited behind the shelter of buildings. French horsemen were advancing across the plain. They believed they were pursuing a retreating enemy. They did not know that an entire regiment of British Hussars stood concealed ahead of them. The commander waited until the French had moved farther from the river Esla. Then he released the 10th Hussars. The resulting charge scattered part of Napoleon's Imperial Guard and brought its commanding general into British captivity. The man who had set the trap was Henry William Paget. He was a gifted cavalry commander, an aristocrat, a politician, and one of the most controversial officers of his generation. His military career would be interrupted by a scandal involving the family of Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington. Yet when Napoleon returned from exile in 1815, Paget would ride beside Wellington as his second in command. At Waterloo, he would direct thousands of Allied horsemen through one of the most famous battles in history. Then, as victory approached, a French cannonball would bring his final charge to a sudden and extraordinary end. This is the story of Henry William Paget, Lord Uxbridge, later First Marquis of Anglesey. Welcome to the History Viper, where every person, every place, and every event is connected. And today our thread begins with the commander who watched and waited at Benavente. Born to privilege. Henry William Bailey was born in London on the 17th of May 1768. He entered the world as a member of a wealthy and increasingly powerful landed family. His father, Henry Bailey, inherited the estates of a distant relative, Sir William Irby Paget, in 1769. As part of that inheritance, the family adopted the surname Paget. The infant Henry William Bailey therefore became Henry William Paget. The family possessed extensive estates in Staffordshire, Dorset, Wales, and elsewhere. Their principal residences included Beau Desert in Staffordshire and Plas Newydd on the island of Anglesey. Political influence accompanied wealth. Paget's father sat in Parliament and continued his rise through the peerage, eventually becoming the first Earl of Uxbridge. Young Henry was therefore raised within the interconnected world of land ownership, parliament, patronage, and inherited privilege that dominated 18th century British society. He was educated at Westminster School and later attended Christ Church, Oxford. But Paget was not destined to become merely another quiet country landowner. Contemporaries would remember him as energetic, handsome, confident, and intensely competitive. He possessed the wealth and social position of an aristocrat, but also the temperament of a cavalryman. In 1790, at only 22 years of age, he entered the House of Commons as member for the Carnarvon boroughs. His parliamentary career was assisted by family influence, as was common within the unreformed political system of the period. But events in France were about to offer the young politician another route to distinction. Europe was moving towards war. In 1789, revolution erupted in France. The French monarchy collapsed, Louis XVI was executed, and revolutionary France entered into conflict with the monarchies of Europe. Britain joined the war in 1793. Paget had served in his father's Staffordshire militia, but he had little experience of professional warfare. Nevertheless, in September 1793, he raised a regiment of infantry largely from among his father's tenantry. The unit became the 80th Regiment of Foot, the Staffordshire Volunteers. Paget received the temporary rank of lieutenant colonel. Wealth and influence had accelerated his promotion, but rank alone could not provide military ability. That would have to be demonstrated in the field. In June 1794, Paget and his regiment joined the Duke of York's army in Flanders. The campaign became a difficult retreat before the advancing French. Allied forces withdrew across the Netherlands, enduring severe weather, shortages and confusion. Paget had been a soldier for less than a year, yet a shortage of senior officers placed him temporarily in command of an infantry brigade. It was an extraordinary responsibility for an inexperienced officer in his 20s. The campaign did not bring Britain victory, but it exposed Paget to the realities of commanding men under pressure. It also convinced him that his future lay not with the infantry, but with the cavalry. During 1795, Paget passed rapidly through commissions in several regiments before becoming Lieutenant Colonel of the 16th Light Dragoons. In 1797, he transferred to the 7th Light Dragoons. Paget devoted himself to training the regiment. He paid close attention to discipline, formation, horsemanship and manoeuvre, helping transform the 7th into one of the most highly regarded cavalry regiments in the British Army. His promotions had come quickly. His professional competence now began to justify them. In 1799, Britain and Russia launched an expedition into the Netherlands. The objective was to weaken French control and encourage resistance to the Batavian Republic, France's Dutch ally. Paget commanded a cavalry brigade containing 4 regiments. The terrain offered few opportunities for mounted troops. Dunes, canals, marshland and narrow roads restricted movement, yet when opportunities appeared, Paget acted decisively. During fighting near Bergen, French cavalry under General Vandamme captured a group of British guns. Paget counterattacked with the 15th Light Dragoons. The guns were recovered and the French pursued towards Egmond aan Zee. Several days later, at Castricum, British cavalry again distinguished itself and took hundreds of prisoners. The expedition ultimately failed and the Allied army withdrew. Nevertheless, Paget returned with his reputation enhanced. He had shown the qualities that would define his military career: energy, aggression, and an instinct for committing cavalry at the decisive moment. In 1801, he became Colonel of the 7th Light Dragoons. The following year, he was promoted to Major General. He had also married Lady Caroline Villiers, daughter of the Earl of Jersey. In 1795, the couple began a large family, and outwardly, Paget appeared to embody the successful aristocratic officer, wealthy, married, politically connected, and increasingly respected within the army. But Paget's personal life would eventually collide with his military ambitions. Before that scandal erupted, however, he would conduct the campaign that established him as one of Britain's finest cavalry commanders. In 1808, opposition to Napoleon spread across Spain and Portugal. Britain sent an army to support resistance on the Iberian Peninsula. Paget, now a lieutenant general, was initially sent to Portugal without a separate command. Later that year, he received command of the cavalry attached to Sir John Moore's army. Paget landed at Corunna and travelled inland through severe logistical difficulties, joining Moore at Salamanca in November. Moore advanced towards the French forces commanded by Marshal Soult. But Napoleon entered Spain with an enormous army and moved to destroy the comparatively small British force. Moore was compelled to retreat towards Galicia. The infantry required time and distance. Paget's cavalry would have to protect them. On the 21st of December, near Sahagun, Paget attempted to trap a French cavalry force. The operation did not unfold exactly as intended, but the 15th Hussars attacked in freezing conditions and broke their opponents. A few days later, squadrons of the 10th Hussars defeated another French detachment near Mayorga. Then, on the 29th of December, came Benavente. French Guard chasseurs crossed the flooded River Esla and drove back British pickets commanded by Brigadier General Charles Stewart. But Stewart's controlled withdrawal drew the French farther from the river. Near Benavente, Paget had concealed the 10th Hussars behind the town's buildings. When the moment came, he released them. The French pursuit became a trap. The Guard chasseurs were driven back towards the river, and their commander, General Lefebvre Desnouettes, was captured. Benavente was a comparatively small engagement within a vast war, but it demonstrated Paget's understanding of cavalry. He used concealment, patience, and timing before committing a fresh regiment against an enemy that had been drawn out of position. During the wider retreat, his horsemen screened the army, confronted French patrols, and helped prevent the pursuit from overwhelming Moore's exhausted columns. The cavalry paid a severe price. Horses became lame, lost their shoes, or collapsed from fatigue. Many of those that survived the march had to be destroyed at Corunna because the transports could not carry them. Paget returned to Britain with his standing as a commander greatly enhanced. But even while he was winning admiration in Spain, his private life was moving towards disaster. Lady Charlotte Wellesley was the wife of Henry Wellesley, a diplomat, and the younger brother of Arthur Wellesley. Arthur was not yet Duke of Wellington, but his own reputation was rising rapidly. Paget and Charlotte began an affair. Both were married. Paget's wife, Lady Caroline, had borne him several children. Charlotte and Henry Wellesley also had children. The affair therefore threatened 2 marriages and 2 powerful aristocratic families. It became impossible to conceal. Paget left his wife and eloped with Charlotte. Henry Wellesley pursued legal action against him and obtained substantial damages. Divorce in early 19th century Britain was extraordinarily difficult, expensive, and public. It required legal proceedings and, ultimately, legislation through Parliament. The details of the broken marriages became the subject of widespread gossip. Lady Caroline divorced Paget, while Henry Wellesley divorced Charlotte. Paget and Charlotte married in 1810. Lady Caroline later married the Duke of Argyll, while Henry Wellesley also remarried. But the scandal had lasting consequences. For Arthur Wellesley, the affair was not an entertaining aristocratic indiscretion. Paget had publicly humiliated and injured his brother. Whatever respect Wellesley retained for Paget's military ability, personal trust had been badly damaged. Paget's prospects of serving under him in the Peninsula effectively disappeared. This created a remarkable contradiction. Britain possessed one of its finest cavalry commanders at precisely the moment Wellington was fighting a major cavalry war in Spain and Portugal. Yet Paget remained at home. His actions had achieved what French cavalry had failed to do. They had removed him from the Peninsular battlefield. Paget did not disappear entirely from military and public life. In 1809, he commanded an infantry division during the Walcheren expedition. The campaign was intended to strike at French power in the Netherlands, but became a costly failure. Disease devastated the British force and killed far more men than combat. Paget returned to Britain without the opportunity to repeat his achievements under Moore. In 1812, his father died. Paget inherited the title and became the second Earl of Uxbridge. He also inherited the responsibilities and immense estates associated with the family. As Wellington's army drove French forces from the Iberian Peninsula and advanced into France, Uxbridge remained absent. Men such as Stapleton Cotton commanded the cavalry in his place. The long war appeared to end in 1814 when Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to the island of Elba. Europe's rulers and diplomats began reconstructing the continent. Paget might reasonably have believed that his opportunity for another great command had passed. Then Napoleon escaped. In March 1815, Napoleon returned to France. Troops sent to arrest him joined him instead. King Louis XVIII fled, and Napoleon reclaimed power without firing a shot. The European powers declared him an outlaw and assembled new armies. A British-led force gathered in the Netherlands under the Duke of Wellington. A Prussian army under Field Marshal Blucher prepared beside it. Henry Paget, now Earl of Uxbridge, was appointed to command the Allied cavalry and horse artillery. The decision placed him directly beneath Wellington. Years had passed since the scandal involving Henry and Charlotte Wellesley. Neither commander could have forgotten it, but Napoleon's return left little room for private resentment. Wellington needed an experienced cavalry commander. Uxbridge needed no instruction in what duty now required of him. Their relationship may not have been warm, but both men were capable of placing professional necessity above personal hostility. Uxbridge joined the army shortly before the campaign began. He commanded a multinational mounted force composed of British, Dutch, Belgian and German regiments. Under him served heavy cavalry intended to deliver powerful battlefield charges and light cavalry used for reconnaissance, screening and pursuit. He also controlled the fast-moving guns of the horse artillery. Napoleon intended to strike before the Allied armies could unite. On the 15th of June, French forces crossed the frontier. The campaign that followed would last only 4 days. It would decide the future of Europe. On the 16th of June, Wellington fought Marshal Ney at Quatre Bras, while Napoleon attacked the Prussians at Ligny. The Prussians were defeated but not destroyed. Wellington withdrew northward towards a defensive position near the village of Waterloo. Heavy rain soaked the roads and fields. Men and horses spent the night exposed to the storm. On the morning of the 18th of June, Wellington's army formed along a ridge south of the village. Napoleon's forces assembled opposite. Uxbridge positioned the Allied cavalry behind the ridge, where the ground concealed and protected much of it from French observation and artillery. Approximately 13,000 cavalrymen and more than 40 guns of the horse artillery fell under his wider authority. The terrain was wet. Crops and mud impeded movement. Thousands of horses were crowded behind the Allied position. Uxbridge now faced a commander's most difficult task. Cavalry could change the course of a battle when committed at the right moment. Used too early, it could exhaust itself before the decisive crisis. Allowed to pursue too far, it could lose formation and become vulnerable to counterattack. At Benavente, Paget had waited until the enemy entered his trap. At Waterloo, he would again have to judge the moment. During the early afternoon, French infantry from the 1st Corps advanced against Wellington's left centre. Dense columns moved towards the Allied ridge. The defenders were under severe pressure. Uxbridge ordered forward Britain's heavy cavalry. The Household Brigade and Union Brigade surged over the ridge. Among them rode the Life Guards, the Royal Horse Guards, the King's Dragoon Guards, and the English, Scottish and Irish regiments of the Union Brigade. The cavalry smashed into the advancing French infantry. Battalions were broken apart. Standards were captured. Thousands of infantrymen fled, surrendered, or attempted to defend themselves against mounted opponents. For a moment, the charge produced astonishing success. But success carried cavalry forward. Formations became disordered as horsemen pursued the French down the slope. Some reached Napoleon's Grand Battery and attacked the artillery crews. Horses were exhausted. Regiments became intermingled. French cavalry counterattacked. The British heavy brigades suffered terrible casualties as they attempted to return. Uxbridge has sometimes been blamed for allowing the pursuit to continue too far. But controlling thousands of excited men and frightened horses amid smoke, noise, and apparent victory was extremely difficult. Orders could be lost within seconds. The charge had helped save Wellington's left centre, but it had also severely weakened some of Britain's finest cavalry. Waterloo was far from over. For hours, the French continued their attacks. Uxbridge moved across the battlefield, directing cavalry formations wherever the Allied line appeared threatened. French cuirassiers and other mounted regiments repeatedly advanced against Wellington's centre. Allied infantry formed squares. Cavalry circled them, searching for a weakness, while artillery fire tore gaps through the defenders. Uxbridge committed units in countercharges and attempted to preserve enough mounted strength for the battle's final crisis. Horses were killed beneath him. Accounts differ on the exact number, but the repeated loss of mounts reflects the danger of his movements across the field. He was not commanding from a distant headquarters. He remained among the cavalry and close to the fighting. Late in the day, Napoleon committed elements of the Imperial Guard. The attack failed. Across Wellington's line, Allied troops began advancing. The Prussians were pressing against Napoleon's flank. The French army started to break. Victory was approaching. Uxbridge rode close to Wellington near the centre of the Allied position. Then came one of the last cannon shots of the battle. A French projectile struck Uxbridge's right leg close to the knee. The joint was shattered. One celebrated account records that Uxbridge turned to Wellington and declared, "By God, sir, I've lost my leg." Wellington supposedly looked down and replied, "By God, sir, so you have." The exchange has become one of the most famous stories associated with Waterloo. Whether those exact words were spoken cannot now be proven, but the injury was real and catastrophic. Uxbridge was removed from the battlefield and carried to a house in the village of Waterloo. There, surgeons examined the ruined limb. Amputation offered his only realistic chance of survival. The leg was removed above the knee without modern anesthesia. Uxbridge reportedly endured the operation with remarkable composure. The severed limb was buried in the garden and later became a macabre tourist attraction, complete with its own memorial. Uxbridge survived. For his service at Waterloo, he was created Marquis of Anglesey. An artificial limb allowed him to walk and ride again, while variations of the design became associated with the name Anglesey leg. But the cannonball ended his active battlefield career. The cavalryman, who had begun the campaign as Henry Paget, commanded at Benavente as Lord Paget, and inherited the title of Earl of Uxbridge had received one final name. He would enter history as Henry William Paget, 1st Marquis of Anglesey. Waterloo ended Paget's battlefield career, but not his public service. In 1828, the Marquis of Anglesey was appointed Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, the Crown's senior representative in the country. Ireland was entering a period of intense political agitation. Daniel O'Connell and the Catholic Association were demanding the removal of the remaining restrictions preventing Roman Catholics from sitting in Parliament and holding certain public offices. Anglesey arrived as the representative of a government led by the Duke of Wellington, yet his experiences in Ireland increasingly convinced him that Catholic emancipation could not be postponed indefinitely. He attempted to administer the law impartially, while warning ministers that continued resistance to reform was dangerous. Anglesey's public sympathy for the Catholic cause placed him in conflict with Wellington and the government. Their correspondence became increasingly strained. The cavalry commander who had once waited for precisely the correct moment at Benavente now believed the political moment for concession had arrived. Wellington was not yet prepared to say so publicly. By the end of 1828, confidence between the Prime Minister and his Lord Lieutenant had collapsed. Anglesey was recalled from Ireland. His removal cannot be attributed to one statement alone. It resulted from a wider breakdown over policy, authority, and his increasingly open support for emancipation. But his departure transformed him into a popular figure among many Irish Catholics. Ironically, Wellington's government soon accepted that resistance was no longer sustainable. The Roman Catholic Relief Act received royal assent in April 1829, allowing Catholics to sit in Parliament and hold most public offices, although accompanying changes also removed the vote from many poorer Irish freeholders. Anglesey's Irish story was not finished. A new government returned him to the Lord Lieutenancy in December 1830, and he remained in office until 1833. The cavalryman, once condemned for an aristocratic scandal, had become associated with one of the defining political reforms of the 19th century. It is tempting to reduce Paget's life to a cavalry charge, a scandal, and a missing leg. But his story was more complicated. He entered the army through wealth and privilege, rising with a speed unavailable to an ordinary soldier. Yet he took military training seriously and demonstrated genuine talent in the Netherlands, Spain, and Belgium. At Sahagun and Benavente, he showed aggression balanced by timing. At Waterloo, he directed thousands of Allied cavalrymen through a battle fought amid confusion, smoke, and repeated crisis. His private behaviour caused profound suffering. His affair with Charlotte Wellesley destroyed 2 marriages, divided families, and helped keep one of Britain's most capable cavalry commanders away from the Peninsular War. Yet when Europe again faced Napoleon, Paget and Wellington set their personal history aside. They did not need to become friends, they needed to defeat the same enemy. Later in Ireland, Anglesey again demonstrated a willingness to follow his own judgment, even when doing so placed him in conflict with Wellington's government. He continued in public service and was promoted to Field Marshal in 1846. Henry William Paget died in London on the 29th of April, 1854, aged 85. He had outlived Napoleon, Wellington, and the age of cavalry warfare that had made him famous. Paget was neither an untarnished hero nor a simple villain. He was a beneficiary of privilege who developed genuine professional ability, a courageous commander whose private choices injured others, and an aristocratic representative of the crown who eventually supported a reform his own government had resisted. That is what history asks of us. Not to hide contradiction, but to examine it. Paget's story does not lead to only one regiment, it divides into 2. The first is the 7th Light Dragoons, the regiment he trained, commanded, and helped transform into one of Britain's finest cavalry formations. The second is the 10th Hussars, the regiment he led at Benavente and released from concealment at precisely the right moment. One carried Paget's standards and methods, the other delivered one of his most celebrated victories. Together their histories reach backwards, beyond Napoleon, to the Revolution of 1688, the Jacobite Rising of 1715, and the long struggle over the British crown. Our next journey follows Paget's Hussars, the 7th and the 10th, 2 regiments, 2 remarkable histories, and another thread leading deep into Britain's divided past. This is where our journey leads next.